Hello and welcome back. Today we are going to be taking a look at Engineer's Overclocks and we're going to be ranking them in our tier list. I got to change some colors here real quick though. Alright, that's better. So, as of starting Season 3, Engineer really didn't get basically any changes from the last season, which is why they're the last to be covered in this season. Scout got a bunch of changes, Gunner's got a couple of changes, and Driller got a couple of changes, but Engie basically got no changes. So if you liked Engie's Overclocks before, you're probably still going to like them now, and if you didn't like them before, you're probably still not going to like them now. Let's begin with our Warthog Auto Shotgun being our first one, and we have Stunner. This is a clean overclock that gets you a higher stun chance, and it also lets you deal 30% more damage to stunned enemies. This one's a nice bonus. I'd put it up into B tier. I don't use it that often. It is just a general buff to the weapon, but I just don't find it as interesting as some of the other overclocks. And then we've got lightweight magazines. Lightweight magazines gives you more total ammo and gives you a faster reload. Both of those are really nice for the shotgun. I'd put this one up in A tier. It's very solid. Next we have magnetic pellet alignment. This one decreases your base spread by 50%, so you can use your shotgun out to longer ranges. It also gives you 30% more weak spot damage, so you can hit enemies in the weak spot even harder. You do lose out on rate of fire with this, but if you want to stack full rate of fire, it isn't that bad with the shotgun, and that's usually what I do anyway, because you can reload cancel a shotgun really easily, so reload speed is not as big a deal, and same with magazine size is not a huge deal when you can just keep doing that. It is a really good overclock. I'd say it's solid A tier as well. Then we've got Cycle Overload. Cycle Overload gives you 1 more point of damage, 2 more rate of fire, but cuts down on your reload speed, which again doesn't really matter because you can reload cancel. And it also increases your base spread by 50%. That last one is kind of bad because it does make it so the shotgun is a very close range option and no longer really super effective at medium range. But if you build this full rate of fire and full damage, you can do a lot of damage per second if you get up right next to something. So, Cycle Overload, another A tier overclock. I really like it. It's probably my favorite shotgun overclock to be running. And then we've got Minishells. Minishells gives you a ton more ammo, a much larger magazine size, and half the amount of recoil that you would otherwise have with the shotgun. But it cuts down on your damage, and you no longer can stun enemies. Stunning enemies is nice for the shotgun, but it's not entirely necessary. Cutting down on your damage is what really hurts. You can still build this for damage and for pellets in tier 2 and tier 4, I believe, and still be able to one-shot grunts, at least if you hit them in the head at close range. It's also really good on critical weakness missions, because you can just shred through things then. And most of the time, enemies are going to be hurt to some extent, whether that be by your turrets, by your shredder drones, by Bosco, by teammates, by potentially your grenades, besides the shredder drones, so plasma bursters, whatever. You just get a whole bunch of shots for this. It's also really nice if you want to take turret whip with it, because you can use it very frequently with it. I'd put Minishells on the lower end of A tier, but it's still really nice. I like all the ammo that it gives you. And we move on to Stubbies Overclocks, where first up we have Super Slim Rounds. Super Slim Rounds gives you a larger magazine size and cuts down on your base spread. Both those are really nice for Stubby. I'd put it B tier. It's just a nice overclock to have. Then we've got Well-Oiled Machine. Well-Oiled Machine gives you more rate of fire and a faster reload. Again, both of them are really nice for Stubby, so B tier or A tier, somewhere around there. Both these are really good. Then we have Refire Booster. This is probably my favorite overclock for Stubby. This increases your rate of fire even more so than Well-Oiled Machine. Gives you 4 more rate of fire, gives you 2 guaranteed electricity damage with every shot, and then it increases your base spread by 50%. That's not a huge deal, especially if you just like using Stubby at close to medium range, which is usually the way I'm using Stubby. So, high A tier. I really like it. Then we've got the Lightweight Rounds. Lightweight Rounds cuts down on your rate of fire and cuts down on your damage, but gives you a whole lot more bullets. You can stack a ton of bullets with this and have something like 900 shots, which I do if I'm taking like the nukes, in which case it's pretty fun then. Cutting down on your damage and cutting down on your rate of fire does kind of suck for Stubby though. I think I'd put this one into the high B tiers. It's pretty good, and I like it on certain builds, but by itself it's just kind of okay. Then we have Turret Arc, which this one's going to be a little bit controversial where I put it. I think I'm going to put this one into C tier, not because it's bad, or not even because it's like really average, but that it's very difficult to use correctly. That's the main reason why I'm putting it here. I'm sure people that really like using it and are really good with it would probably put it like A tier. Totally fair. I have seen people that use Turret Arc very, very effectively. I am not one of those people. I set it up in very basic situations, and it does help if you can get enemies to go there. So if you have lures, or if you know a dreadnought's going to come through or something, Turret Arc can be super useful. So Turret Arc lets you shoot your turrets, and once you've triggered the electricity status effect on it, then they will start zapping everything around the turret. If you put it on 2 turrets, it will arc back and forth. You can actually put it on more than 2 turrets because any turret perk that you have works on every engineer's turret. So if you have 4 NGs and you have 8 turrets, you can have 8 turret arcs going across them. That is an option, and that certainly makes this way more consistent. So more NGs equals more better. This does cut down on your rate of fire and does cut down on your ammo. And like I said, the main reason why it's here is just because it is difficult to use, and I am not that great at using it. If you are good at using it, then I'm sure it's higher up on your list because it can be super good. Yeah, I think that kind of explains why I put Turret Arc there. Next, we have Turret Em Discharge, which I'd put this one up into S tier. This one is far easier to use than Turret Arc. Your placement doesn't need to be nearly as good, and you can get a ton of value out of this. You rarely run through shots with the with Stubby if you have this one, and you're constantly able to set it up. So this one works similar to Turret Arc. Once you set your turret up and you fire at your turret, you have to trigger the electricity status on, well, just your bullets. And then when that triggers, it will explode out, dealing damage to everything around it within a 5-meter radius. This comes with the downside of losing out on a little bit of damage and a little bit of mag size. That's not a huge deal for how much value you get and how much damage you can do. This one actually used to be better than it is currently, because there was a trick to where you would only need to build your turrets once and then you could just shoot the nodes. So you'd place down a turret, build it up, then recall your turret and just keep placing the node somewhere and shooting that. That no longer works. You actually have to build the turret up entirely, which is probably better. And again, if you have multiple engineers, this one works on all the turrets. Same goes with Turret Whip for the shotgun. So any turret perks work for every turret. Then we've got the Loki rifle up next, where we have a Racer. A Racer is the clean overclock that gives you 12 more mag size and increases your maximum targets. This one's fine. It's like B tier. If you like having more lock-ons, that's cool. It's not great if you want to take either of the mods that increase either the damage or the fear chance once your gun is fully locked on. Then we've got armor breaking module. This one just gives you armor breaking on the Loki. I'm going to put it into C tier because it's not super interesting. It's not bad. It's just kind of meh. It's actually, I shouldn't say it's just meh. It's actually good. It's just, I wish it was a bit more than just what it is currently. And then we have explosive chemical rounds. This one is really good. This one I'm going to put up into S tier. This one makes it so once you have 3 locks onto a target and then fire, the third shot, or whatever shot would kill, will then cause an explosion, dealing damage to all enemies around it. I think this is in a 5-meter radius. The explosion will deal extra damage, and it also fears as well as has high armor breaking. That's really good. You just turn your rifle into a burst rifle and every third shot explodes. Or every 1 shot explodes if you put 3 targets on something like a Swarmer. Because all you need is just the 3 locks, and then whatever the bullet is that kills it will cause the explosion. Even if it doesn't kill it and you just have 3 locks on it, then it will also cause an explosion on the 3rd bullet. Very, very useful. Downside is that you lose out on damage, which doesn't matter because your explosions are going to make up for that really quick. And you lose out on ammo. Again, that doesn't really matter because your explosions are going to make up for that really quick. It is a really good choice, especially if you want to take the electricity in tier 5 as well. So every 3 locks that you put on an enemy, you'll cause an explosion and you'll start zapping them. So you'll deal more damage over time. And you can take the other option in tier 3 that makes it so enemies take 20% more damage if they're affected by electricity or fire or both, because they stack on top of one another too. Then we've got Seeker rounds, and Seeker rounds I'd put up into A tier, probably on the lower end of A tier, but they are nice. This just gives you aimbot plus wall hacks for a slower rate of fire. You also have less locks, and you have a slightly longer reload time. Reload time doesn't really matter because the low key can also be reload canceled pretty easy. And this one's really useful in like Dreadnought missions where you can just fire right through them. Or if you find oppressors or Praetorians particularly annoying, you can just keep firing with your regular shots right through them. It's also really good for Spitballers because you see a Spitballer, you go behind cover, and then you just fire through the floor at them or through the ceiling or whatever. And it's also basically impossible to hit teammates with this because the bullets do kind of warp around to the target. Some people have said that it doesn't work with blow-through rounds, which is not true. It does work with blow-through rounds, but it's more difficult to use because usually you're not directly looking at something and your bullets just punch through once they hit the target and then go out. So still not a bad choice. Then we've got Executioner. Executioner I'd put in S tier. Executioner is a really nice overclock. The downsides aren't even that much of a downside. You lose out on maximum targets that you can lock on, which just helps if you want to go with more damage in tier 5, because then you only have to have 8 locks in total. You also lose out on 12 total ammo and 12 total magazine size. That's not a huge deal for what this gives you. It gives you 50% more weak spot damage when you're at full locks, and it gives you 50% reduction in time to lock on. So you can lock onto things really quick, and you only have 8 shots, so you're going to lock onto something super fast. And as long as you can just guide the bullets into the weak spot, you'll make up for the downside basically within the first clip. Then we've got Neuro Lasso, which is a bit of a weird one. I'm going to put Neuro Lasso into B tier because usually you're using this in combination with something else. By itself, it's an okay overclock. So what this does is it slows down any enemies that are affected by the locks for the duration that you have them locked on. So once you shoot the shots, then the locks no longer affect them. Every lock attached to an enemy will slow it down more and more. You can spread these across multiple enemies if you'd like, how you use the low key normally. The downside of this is that you have a longer lock-on time, so you can't lock on as quickly as you otherwise would. And you do have a limit on how long you can hold the locks onto a single enemy. So you can only hold it on for so long. It's pretty good if you want to combine it with like Spinning Death. It's pretty fun then because you just fire Spinning Death, stun something, and pull out the low key and hold it on it. And it really can't get outside of Spinning Death before Spinning Death is over, dealing all the damage that it would. It can also be really useful in multiplayer because you can slow down particularly big targets. So Dreadnoughts again, a Detonator, or just swarms of grunts. It can be pretty useful. All right, then we move on to the secondaries for NG, which everybody loves the secondaries for NG. And first up, we got Clean Sweep. Clean Sweep for the grenade launcher is going to go up into A tier. It is a solid overclock. It gives you more area damage, and it gives you a larger explosion radius. 2 things that you want with a grenade launcher, and it will work with any build for the grenade launcher. Then we've got Pack Rat, probably tied with Light Tanks for being the most basic overclock in the game. This gives you 2 more grenades. And that's it. A tier. It's nice. You can still build a grenade launcher however you'd like. If you didn't want to take ammo in tier 1 or tier 2 for the grenade launcher, but you still wanted the ammo, Pack Rat makes up for that. If you did, you can just have even more ammo. So it's a win-win all the way around. Compact rounds, I'm going to say, is maybe B tier. It's a little bit of an odd one, just because we have 3 ammo overclocks for the grenade launcher. And this one, it lowers your area damage by 10, which really doesn't matter. Lowers your area effect radius by 0.5 meters. That one kind of hurts. And it gives you 5 more ammo. You could argue this is better than Pack Rat, and for certain builds, if you just want it for AoE damage, yeah, it probably, or if you just want it for more area coverage, especially if you want to pair this with fire, could be a better option there. Pack Rat's a little bit more flexible, but both are fairly flexible, so this is like high B tier, this is like low A tier. They're very comparable to one another. We got RJ250. RJ250 I'm going to put up into S tier. It is super fun to use. It is kind of effective as a crowd control option, particularly against grunts and against swarmers. Against other bigger enemies, it's not as useful, and usually it's the utility that sets it apart from the other options. What RJ250 does is give you a lot more ammo, faster reloads, and it also gives you the ability to rocket jump. You can potentially break falls with this. You can also potentially kill yourself with this. I've seen that happen plenty of time with engineers. You can also use this just to make space. If you jump up in the air and fire this similar to something like Special Powder with the boomstick, as long as you hit something, you can fling yourself back, and you can fling other dwarfs with this too. This all comes at the downside of a lot of your area damage though. And usually I'm going to be putting fire on this so that it cuts down on that damage even more, which helps because, again, this hurts you when you shoot it, so less damage can actually help you in this case. And if you put the fire on it, it's still good crowd control for grunts and for swarmers. Outside of that, though, it's not as useful. It's not going to do way great against big enemies. Then we've got Fat Boy. Fat Boy is the one that gives you nukes. I'm going to put this one into S tier for nukes. It gives you a lot more area damage, a much bigger explosion radius, but it cuts down on your total ammo massively, and it also cuts down on your velocity. Velocity doesn't really matter because you can take the tier 3 option and just make up for the velocity there. It's mostly the ammo. You don't have very many nukes in total, but good news is if you see a swarm of grunts, you can just nuke it, and then there won't be a swarm of grunts anymore. It's also really good with lures, because if you fire this and there's still more left over, you can throw the lure into the nuke hole. Everything climbs in and then dies from all the radiation that you put there. You can also mine with it, which is pretty cool. So if there is high areas where there's materials that you want, whether that be gold, nitra, it's kind of ironic to be shooting it for nitra, but if you do see something like that and you really need it and you got a nuke left, you could use it for that. Same goes with any of the rare materials. So it is pretty fun. And then we've got Highproof Repellent, another S tier. This one is really strong. It turns your grenade launcher into a railgun. You get massive direct damage, massive velocity for your shot, so it goes basically straight into whatever you're firing at. You lose out on basically the whole explosion. It's no longer really a grenade launcher for well, crowd control. It's not really even a grenade launcher anymore, and you lose out on maximum ammo. There is an interesting thing with this though, is that it converts your damage type too. You no longer do direct damage, you actually do disintegration damage, which is unaffected by the fire. So you can take fire and Highproof Repellent and just light things on fire with no downside. It doesn't actually cut down on your damage whatsoever. This one is really strong, especially if you just want to take out big things, and that's really the only case that you're going to be using this in. You're not going to want to use this against like normal grunts, slashers, guards, anything like that. Basically, it's going to be menaces, detonators, dreadnoughts, praetorians, oppressors. Any of those, any big target that you want to take out, you can take it out very quickly with Highproof Repellent. And then we move on to the Breach Cutter, which first up we got lightweight cases, and lightweight cases also going to go right up in S tier. This one is arguably one of the best clean overclocks in the game. Even though it's a really basic one, it gives you more ammo and a faster reload. And usually you don't care about the faster reload for the Breach Cutter because you can just take Born Ready and that'll reload it. So it's just for the ammo. It gives you 3 more ammo overall, but it's for the Breach Cutter, and the Breach Cutter is pretty crazy. If you want to build it for all for ammo, you can then have 27 shots with the Breach Cutter before you need to get a resupply. And 27 shots with the Breach Cutter will kill basically anything that's causing you issues, unless you get really unlucky with a lot of swarms or something. Then we have roll control, which I'm going to put into C tier. I know plenty of people could put this into D tier. This just lets you spin the Breach Cutter shots when you fire it. I find that really fun. I actually enjoy using it. As to how useful it is, I don't know if it's really helped me out too much. It is entertaining to watch though, and that's the only thing it does. There's no downside to this one, but you could argue there's no upside to it either. Then we've got Strong Plasma Current, which I'm going to put this one into B tier. This one gives you more beam damage, as well as a longer lifetime on the beam. Both those are good, but both of them aren't really necessary for the Breach Cutter. Breach Cutter already does a really high amount of damage. The line duration, though, is nice, especially if you want to stack it with more line duration, because then you can use it out to a little bit longer range. Return to Sender, I'm going to put into B tier as well. This one lets you fire out the beam and then recall it, so you can potentially get double the amount of damage, or damage per second, well, I guess it's both, onto bigger enemies like Praetorians or Dreadnoughts and stuff, but it does cut down on your total ammo by 6. So you're losing out on ammo to potentially get more damage towards single targets. A little bit difficult to use. It is a super fun overclock though. It feels like you're doing a magic trick. Then we have High Voltage Crossover, which I'm also probably going to put into B tier or maybe A tier. It honestly doesn't come with much of a downside for the Breach Cutter. This one cuts down on your magazine by a little bit, but gives you electricity on your shots with the Breach Cutter, so it deals damage over time. It's just that you usually don't need that because the Breach Cutter will usually kill whatever you're trying to hit without the electricity added on. It might get you a little bit more value overall, and it is just a bonus to the gun, but it's questionable as to how useful that really is for it. Then we have Spinning Death, which I'd put up into A tier. Spinning Death lets you have a blender. You fire the Breach Cutter shot out and it just spins around, chops everything up. This increases the projectile lifetime, and it also increases the beam width. You can increase these even further with some of the mods, which is pretty nice. This does cut down on your damage per second. You also lose out on ammo and magazine size. Those can kind of hurt it. The main thing that I would say that hurts Spinning Death is that it's short range, which doesn't make it way great for all circumstances. It is really good for rezzing people, though. You fire this on top of somebody that went down, and then you can just stand in the middle of it where you pick somebody up, because you're unaffected by the Spinning Death damage. Your teammates are not, though, so your teammates will take some Spinning Death damage. It's not a whole ton, though, and they're probably not going to stand in it for super long. And then we have Inferno. Inferno I'm going to put up into A tier. Inferno's pretty good. This one makes it so you have Inferno on your Breach Cutter, which has an extremely high chance of lighting things on fire, and that will deal damage over time. This does cut down on your total damage per second, but the Breach Cutter already has really high damage per second, so cutting down on it doesn't hurt it that much. It also cuts down on your armor breaking, which doesn't really matter, because if you're firing the Breach Cutter at something, if it's on fire, you're dealing more damage, and you don't really care where the Breach Cutter's hitting something, because you can just kind of shoot all the way through it. So it's not too much of a downside either. And then we have our Shard Diffractor Overclocks for our last weapon. First up, we've got Efficiency Tweaks, which Efficiency Tweaks I'm going to put up into A tier. It is really good. More ammo, more charge ammo. You don't need anything else for the Shard Diffractor, because the Shard Diffractor works essentially like the minigun. And, you know, could you imagine if you just get more ammo and more ammo with your minigun? that's good. So more ammo with your laser beam is even more gooder. Then we've got automated beam controller. This increases your ammo, increases your discharge rate, and increases your recharge time, but it cuts down on your overall capacity, and the beam will continue to fire until you release it. If you do manually turn off the beam, like by pickaxe canceling it, it will still consume a portion of your ammo. So this one's more for crowd control. The beam controller's okay at crowd control. This one I'd probably put B tier. I think it's fine, but it's not one that I use a whole lot. Feedback loop is something I use more because this is better crowd control than the automatic beam controller. This one will increase the radius and damage and area effect of the beam while firing it over time, but this does cut down on your total ammo. So this is a better crowd control option, but still comes with somewhat of a downside. I'd put this one A tier. Then we've got Volatile Impact Reactor. This one I'm also going to put up into A tier. I think this is actually your best crowd control. Well, maybe. This one is probably one of your best crowd control options, where you lose out on area radius and you lose out on charge capacity, so you don't have nearly the magazine that you did. But now you can put magma on the ground, which will then build up heat and burn enemies that step across or stay in it for too long. Kind of think of it as sort of like sticky flames. A little bit. Plascrete Catalyst lets you shoot one of your Plascrete platforms. Once you've shot it for so long, it will then explode, dealing damage to everything around it. It also causes area damage, so you can kind of mine with this too. It's not nearly as effective as nuke mining, but you can do it. And that explosion deals really high damage to everything around it, including allies, so be careful with that. You can blow yourself up or allies with it fairly easy. It does come at the cost of your total ammo, and it does come at the cost of your recharge time. Plascrete Catalyst, I'd probably say is like A tier though. It is really good. It's really fun. It's kind of a derpy overclock, but I really like it. It's a whole lot better than it used to be, even though the other clock was also kind of fun to mess around with when it lets you bounce beams around. It was almost never effective, but it was fun to use. And then our last overclock is Overdrive Booster. Overdrive Booster just lets you turn on the Overdrive Booster, which you can do the same way that you would with the Cryo Cannon for something like Snowball or Ice Spear. So once you start firing, hit your reload button, and then you'll do the Overcharge shot. Overcharged makes it so it consumes twice as much ammo, but you do 2.5 times damage. But then at the end of it, you have a much longer recharge time, and you have to keep firing the beam until you're out of ammo, unless you pickaxe cancel it, in which case it still takes all of the ammo that it otherwise would. This one is solid S tier. This one's really good because it basically has no downside. You don't need to be using the charged beam all the time. You can choose to use it whenever you'd like. So against big enemies like Dreadnoughts or Praetorians or Oppressors, you can choose to flip this on and then deal even more damage. Oh, you also can't move when you're using this, I should say that too. But then if you're just coming across normal enemies and you don't feel the need to switch on an Overdrive Booster, you can just fire the Shard Diffractor normally and it comes with absolutely no downside. So this is where I'd put all of Engie's overclocks. As you can see, Engie has a lot of really good overclocks, only a few that aren't as good. But even on its not as good overclocks, they're still generally a bonus, or you don't really do much. Thanks for watching this video. Tell me your thoughts on Engie's overclocks down in the comments below, and I will see you guys next time. Bye-bye!